Before we start today, have you checked out our new channel, Visual Academy? If you haven't, you should definitely do it now. The link is in the description.
6 BC. He was the son of Olympias.
It covers all the most interesting places, people, and periods in history, from Genghis Khan to the ancient Greeks, or my personal favourite, the Vikings, with fantastic animation and incredible storytelling, and some voiceovers from people you might recognise. Check out Visual Academy here on YouTube and let us know what you think. And now, let's get started. So my friends, on the 2nd of December 2020, legislative elections were held in Venezuela. Well, rather than the elections, what was celebrated was a pantomime, a parody, a con, a great swindle in which the supposedly official party, the PSUV, the party led by Nicolas Maduro, reaped the absolute majority in the National Assembly, which is the Venezuelan Parliament. A majority that has less value than a lottery ticket filled in after the draw when the winning numbers are already known. And no, I'm not exaggerating. Because my friends, this is not a matter of left or right. In fact, not even the Socialist International believes the intentions of the Bolivarian regime anymore. Check this out.
The Socialist International called the elections by the Maduro regime illegitimate. Infobay. The Socialist International once again raises its voice to express its resolute support and solidarity with the people of Venezuela and with their democratic forces who have again seen their liberties and rights seriously violated by the dictatorial regime of Nicolas Maduro, on this occasion with the illegitimate legislative elections held yesterday. Communique of the Socialist International on December 7th, 2020.
If there is one thing that stands out about this process, it was precisely that of the enormous abstention that was registered. According to the Bolivarian National Electoral Council, only a little more than 30% of Venezuelans with the right to vote actually did so. A voter turnout figure that the Observatory Against Fraud, a body created by the parliament itself, reduced to around 20%, and that the Democratic Unity Roundtable placed at just over 15% of the census. In other words, Nicolas Maduro's party won an absolute majority in parliament with the support of only 11 to 20% of Venezuelans who are eligible to vote. And that's without taking into account all the rigging and shenanigans that were carried out. Do you want some concrete examples? If you do, listen up. Practically all of the opposition, the real opposition, did not make an appearance, and yet many parties, at least 8 of them, including Juan Guaido's, were intercepted by the Bolivarian justice system, which put at the head of the parties people whom it considered appropriate. Yeah, that's right. Between 2019 and 2020, the Maduro courts deposed opposition party leaders to replace them with people who were, let's just say, more suitable for the regime. And of course, that's not all. The composition of the electoral body was irregularly elected by Maduro's government. It was determined that, in some constituencies, they would literally vote by a show of hands. The composition of the assembly was altered to favour small districts perfectly controlled by the regime, and it's best that we don't mention the recounts. The list of irregularities was long, very long. Precisely because of this, no country or moderately serious international body has recognised the elections as such. But hold on a minute, because surprisingly we can still find cases, like that of the former Spanish president, José Luis Rodríguez Zapatero, who not only attended as an electoral observer and considered the elections legitimate, but even grumbled that the opposition had not wanted to participate in this rigged event.
Ojalá todos hubieran decidido participar. Y yo no censuro a los que no han decidido no participar. Porque como demócrata me siento siempre en la obligación, creo que es un deber de tener una visión amplia, generosa e inclusiva. Y digo, ustedes han decidido no participar en estas elecciones. Bueno, creo que cuando eso ha decidido alguna parte de la oposición en Venezuela no ha ido bien a nadie. A nadie. Ni a la propia oposición, ni al país. Y por tanto, reflexionen.
In any case, beyond the opinion that some may have about the reasons that led Zapatero to defend or whitewash Nicolas Maduro's regime, in today's VisualPolitik video, we want to answer a clear and concise question. How does Bolivarian democracy really work? In other words, can we really refer to Venezuela as a democracy? How does the government of Nicolas Maduro manage to stay in power? You see, my friends, what you're about to see is a story of exploitation, abuse, looting, and destruction. Are you ready? If so, let's get cracking.
The fictitious democracy.
So friends, those of you who regularly follow VisualPolitik will know that we have talked a lot about Venezuela. And the truth is that although at times it seems that the country has disappeared from the big headlines these days, things over there are as bad as ever. Which, for at least 2 decades in Venezuelan terms, means they're even worse than ever. But, as we have already told you, in this video, we're going to try and focus on how the rule of law and Bolivarian democracy really works. Or, to put it another way, how Chavezism has turned democracy into a more decorative word. And no, this is not an unfounded accusation or an unwarranted denunciation. We only have to review the reports of, among others, the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, Human Rights Watch, the Organization of American States, or the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, a body led by Michelle Bachelet, a former president of Chile and a person who, in her political life, was not exactly hostile to the Chavez revolution. At least, I don't think anyone can credibly accuse her of being a pawn of the international right, or a puppet of the Miami, Madrid, Washington axis to which the dictator Nicolas Maduro so often refers. And yes, I said dictator, because the results of all these human rights reports make it clear that the only person who really continues to believe that Venezuela is a more or less functional democracy is, unfortunately, the former president of the Spanish government, José Luis Rodríguez Zapatero. But let's get to the point. Let's go deeper into the political and social reality of this country. What exactly do these reports say about human rights? Well, let's start with the UN report. The report of the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights was published in 2019. It took into account all of the data collected during several visits by UN officials between September 2018 and March 2019. And while it is true that Maduro's regime facilitated, at least to all appearances, the work of these observers in several detention centres and even allowed UN evaluators to speak with several detainees, the truth is that not even that softened the conclusions of these experts about what is happening today in Venezuela. Because, my friends, the words were harsh. Very harsh.
Bachelet denounces torture and executions in the Maduro government, El País.
Complaints that, of course, still persist to this day, more than a year after the report was published. Because this is how the Bolivarian regime works. It is the reality that nobody wants, nor can, hide anymore.
25th of September 2020, Bachelet denounces more than 2,000 extrajudicial executions in Venezuela in 2020. ABC.
And that is not an isolated complaint.
Venezuela. Extrajudicial executions in low-income areas. A pattern of serious police abuse that goes unpunished. Human Rights Watch. 2nd of December 2020, the OAS denounces more than 18,000 extrajudicial executions in Venezuela and questions the role of the ICC. Europa Press.
That last report, by the way, has only just been released. It is an update and extension of the 2018 report. And what do you want me to say? The figures that the Organization of American States has now put on the table are simply terrifying. According to the OAS, Nicolas Maduro is responsible for more than 18,000 extrajudicial executions, more than 15,500 cases of arbitrary detention and imprisonment, 724 cases of forced disappearance between 2018 and 2019 alone, and hundreds of documented cases of torture, including sexual violence. And all of this without counting the climate of enormous violence and misery that the regime has created in the streets.
Our report brings to life the extraordinary suffering of the people of Venezuela inflicted by Nicolas Maduro and his regime. The only reasonable conclusion to be drawn from examining the scale and extent of human rights abuses, such as extrajudicial executions, arbitrary detentions, and the imposition of living conditions designed to cause great suffering or death, is that these actions constitute crimes against humanity. Jared Genser, OAS Special Advisor.
Friends, we're talking repression, information censorship, political censorship, persecution of dissidents, economic crisis, paramilitary groups roaming at large, torture, a health crisis, lack of food and medicine, and the list just goes on. The reports from each and every one of these organizations make official everything we already knew about Venezuela, but that only came to us through the media or through the testimonies of the Venezuelans themselves. In this way, the United Nations has formally verified the regular practice of torture in detention centres by means of electrocutions, asphyxiation with plastic bags, deprivation of water and food, beatings, and countless other aggressions. All of this was carried out by officials from SEBIN, the Venezuelan Intelligence Service, the Bolivarian National Guard, or the Directorate General of Military Counterintelligence. And then we have the FAES, the Venezuelan Special Action Forces, which are accused of creating real death squads. Squads that approach their targets in unidentified vans, sometimes without license plates. And once there, they break into the homes of supposed opponents or people who are uncomfortable with the regime without any kind of court order. They often do so dressed in black and wearing balaclavas. They steal, loot, and arrest as many people as they want. In fact, this type of operation usually contributes to the list of violent deaths classified as resistance to authority, which adds up, as we have seen, to more than 18,000 cases in the last 5 years alone. And it's not just the government bodies, the official ones. Not at all. The Bolivarian regime has also created military, or rather paramilitary intelligence and defense units using civilians, through local structures such as the communal councils, the units of Battle Hugo Chavez, and the Network of Socio-Political Articulation and Action, the RAAS. We are talking about structures that, in practice, function as parallel units to the state, but that are directly at its service, or rather, at the service of the government. Their members can do almost any savage act to maintain the regime without the need to wear any uniform. And, of course, as you can imagine, all of these groups, official or not, act with total impunity. Among other things, because the courts of justice and judicial bodies are directly controlled by the government and the PSUV, the United Socialist Party of Venezuela, the all-powerful party, the party of Nicolas Maduro, and other Bolivarian satraps. So, the courts tend not to preside over, they dismiss or even cover up cases of police abuse, summary executions, or repression by the different groups that make up the Bolivarian Action Network. And then, as if that were not enough, we then have to add to all this the intervention and control of the media, and the instrumentalization of even the supposed social programs. For example, the Venezuelan government has a food distribution program through local committees for supply and production, which distribute the so-called clap boxes, which are part of a kind of social assistance policy implemented by Maduro. Well, to access these food boxes, you have to sign up, and the government has to include you on their distribution list. And, of course, receiving items depends on how close to the government you are, because this process can be more or less fast or even reversible depending on citizens' actions. This is because the list of beneficiaries of social programs is basically managed by local structures of the ruling PSUV party. That is, if you want to receive this aid, you must remain silent and be very careful not to speak out against the government. And also, don't forget the difficult economic situation Venezuela is going through. Just think that we are talking about a country where the United Nations found that many people can barely eat once a day. More than 4.5 million Venezuelans already suffer from malnutrition. So, not having access to these programs, however miserable they may be, can be a huge problem. Blackmail? Did someone say blackmail? Friends, none of this is speculation, not even the denunciation of opposition groups. All of these issues have been confirmed by an infinite number of international bodies. The Maduro regime has extended its control over all aspects of Venezuelan society. It has dismantled democratic institutions and has repressed by force any real political dissidents. As we have seen, to achieve its objectives, the regime has not hesitated to attack journalists, to violently disarm demonstrators, and to imprison, torture, make disappear, or kill thousands of opponents. And then, to top it off, they have a terrible crisis, the real economic collapse that the country is experiencing. Poverty is on the rise, hyperinflation is uncontrollable, and there is a huge shortage of commodities, including health and pharmaceutical products. To give you an idea of the scale of the disaster, in October 2020, it was estimated that more than 5.5 million people had left the country in recent years. More than 5.5 million people. To give you an idea, we are already talking about one of the largest displaced population in the world. More than that caused by many wars. In real terms, the GDP per capita has shrunk to the level it had in the 1940s. Obviously, my friends, given such conditions, you can guess what kind of democracy is in the country. Because no, democracy is not only about voting. In fact, that is almost the least of it. A democratic system needs plurality, freedom of expression, freedom of the press, an effective rule of law, justice, freedom to demonstrate, transparency, and an independent electoral commission. And in the Bolivarian regime, there is nothing like that. Because Nicolas Maduro's regime is simply a dictatorship. Cruel dictatorship that has destroyed the lives of millions of people and annihilated the lives of thousands and thousands of Venezuelans because they were considered unsuitable. It is incomprehensible that there are still people, including, as we said before, an ex-president of the Spanish government who served spurious interests and who continue to support, defend, or justify the Bolivarian regime.
No hay otro camino. y este día electoral del 6 de diciembre de 2020 supone un paso adelante. Es más, me atrevería a decir que es el principio del final de los peores momentos que ha vivido Venezuela. El principio del final de un conflicto total. El principio del final de unas sanciones injustas e incomprensibles.
You see, my friends, what was experienced on Sunday the 6th of December 2020, no matter how much José Luis Rodríguez Zapatero insists on saying otherwise, was not a democratic election, but a vile ruse, the umpteenth attempt by the Venezuelan regime to camouflage what they really are, a cruel dictatorship. But, having reached this point, it's your turn. The situation in Venezuela is terrible, but finding a solution seems increasingly complicated. That is why I'm asking you directly. What do you think would have to happen in Venezuela for things to change? How could the regime of Nicolas Maduro be overthrown without inflicting even more damage to the Venezuelan people? And how safe is the democracy in your country? Leave your answers in the comments below. So, as always, we really hope you enjoyed this video. Please hit like if you did, and don't forget to subscribe for brand new videos. Also, don't forget to check out our friends at the Reconsider Media podcast. They provided the vocals in this episode that weren't my dulcet tones. Finally, this channel is possible because of Patreon and our patrons on that platform. Please consider joining them and supporting our mission of providing independent political coverage. And, as always, I'll see you next time.
And if you want to learn more about politics and hear even more of my lovely voice, you can join us at Reconsider Media. We have a podcast at reconsidermedia.com/podcast. See you there.